The researchers found that those dementia caregivers that were distressed about their job had a 63% higher mortality rate. For each emotional state, there is a breath pattern that is associated with it. When we feel joy and happiness, that we breathe in a particular way, but if we breathe in a particular way, we can feel joy and happiness. Welcome, everyone, to the Dementia Doc podcast. I am Dr. Miguel Rivera, and I am joined by my wife, Ganga. And today we are going to be discussing a highly accessible and fairly simple way of reducing overwhelm and stress in our lives, in particular as it relates to caregiver stress.
If you're listening to this podcast, I'm sure you're firsthand familiar how hard caregiver stress is. And Miguel, what's the importance of discussing caregiver stress in particular?
Well, the first thing that comes to mind is that the, stress as related to caregiving is easily dismissible. And what I mean by that is that people just kind of accept that the stress that comes with the job of being a dementia caregiver is a given. And because of that, they tend to maybe not pay attention to it. But I would make the stark warning that that is not what the data supports. And that the studies have been published in which the researchers found that those dementia caregivers that were distressed about their job had a 63% higher mortality rate. Now, I really want to emphasize that we're not talking about, some depression or anxiety. We're talking actually about an increased risk of dying. And anybody like myself who's been a dementia practitioner for some time will be able to attest so many times the dementia caregiver will die before the person with dementia does.
Wow, 63%. That is a large number. And what else the stress can contribute? I'm sure that, let's say, okay, the person is alive, but can that, for example, contribute to their chronic diseases, their aging process, or them developing cognitive decline too?
Absolutely. So, just to simplify it, stress is a killer. Stress is one of the most important risk factors for the development of all kinds of chronic diseases. For example, high levels of stress are associated with diabetes, they're associated with cardiovascular disease, they're associated with cancer, they are associated with, just virtually anything at all that you can think of. If you add stress on top of it, is going to make it worse. So it's really important to not um, disregard it.
And I think one more thing that is important for caregivers is that if you're stressed, the quality of care that you can provide for your loved one is also going down. And sometimes that is maybe even the main domino that moves caregivers into action because so many of you are driven to provide a good care for your family member. And just to know that if you're not taking care of yourself and the stress is high, quality of care that you can provide is going down too.
Yeah, and Ganga, that was one of the things that I learned the hard way in taking care of my dad. I maybe was under the idea that because I knew about dementia, that was going to protect me, um, against stress, but it really didn't. And actually, I fell victim to the same thing that I am warning you all about today, which was that even though I was showing signs and symptoms of stress, like feeling depressed, feeling anxious, disregarding my own health, having problems with sleep, feeling exhausted, I still had difficulty realizing that this was what was happening to me. And I think that it really affected my ability and my capacity to take care of my dad. When I found myself in that place where I just could not give enough of myself because I was so tapped out in other ways.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. I definitely remember those times. And that's why we thought to discuss something that is available to us on a daily basis. Because again, stress is a very complicated subject. It's simple, but at the same time, we could talk probably 3 podcasts on just how stress affects us. And there are many ways that we can take care of ourselves. But there's one thing that is always available, and that is our breath. And we want to discuss simple techniques that you can do, but also a little bit of a science of how and why breath works and what we can do. So, Miguel, where would you like to start on this?
Well, I think the first thing that comes to mind is that our breath is something that is always with us. And so many times we are on automatic mode, meaning that we are not paying any attention at all about the quality of our breath. However, the science speaks about the amazing things that just even paying attention to our breath can do in terms of affecting the way that our brain works. Like, just to give you an idea, just by paying conscious attention to the breath, we begin to change the way that the neurons work in particular areas of the brain, like the limbic system, that are directly related to emotional regulation and cognition, just by paying attention to the breath. That doesn't mean, you know, lengthening the breath, taking a deep inhale, lengthening the exhale. We're just talking about bringing our conscious attention to the awareness that we are breathing.
Which you can do anywhere. Basically, sorry for that, but even in the toilet, toilet, shower, walking, driving, you can always just bring awareness to the breath. And we will go a little bit through specifics towards the end. And right now, I want to ask you, Miguel, how is stress and breath connected?
So, it's like it's a feedback loop. Let's say that we experience an event like our loved one being really agitated or being resistant or becoming physically aggressive or sexually inappropriate, whatever it may be. And when that emotion hits, it will immediately change our breathing pattern from whatever the pattern was to this pattern of being anxious, stressed out, perhaps overwhelmed. Now, what is important is that that pattern itself then goes back and feeds into the brain, and it perpetuates that feeling of anxiety or overwhelm, so that the brain affects the breath and the breath affects the brain. The brain affects the breath and the breath affects the brain. So, whenever we feel ourselves as reacting to a particular emotion or a situation, and we notice, for example, that our breath has changed, just by shifting our awareness, just by bringing our breath into a more conscious control, we can kind of short circuit that anxious or that feeling of overwhelm. Again, just by paying attention to our breath. And as we will discuss, something as simple as taking some deep breaths and lengthening the exhale.
I want to also stress that just paying attention often changes things. I think that's what we see in coaching and therapy a lot. Just being aware that already brings a change. And also, all of those facts, they're not new. Basically, ancient yogis use that in their practices. Also, we know that actors sometimes use that. They would use a breathing pattern to evoke the emotion that they need to evoke. Let's say if they need to get angry or upset, they may use a breath of And you're going to feel a certain emotion by just changing the pattern of the breath. So it's like driving the car and knowing how to drive the car and basically being in touch with your breath is like being able to drive the vehicle of your own body. But the very first step is just awareness and just being aware.
Yeah, and Ganga, the first thing that comes to mind that based on what you just said, is that with this idea that the first thing that comes is, perhaps our awareness that we are feeling in a particular way. So, I think that the tendency of most of us, it certainly was with me, the tendency was to try to avoid feeling those emotions that I was perceiving at the moment to be negative. Like if my dad got agitated and I got angry at him, then I immediately kind of would feel guilty about getting angry with him. And I would not want to feel how was it that I was really feeling. And I think that when we pay attention to our breath, it gives us a little bit of for lack of a better word, breathing room. It gives us an opportunity to maybe connect a little bit with what is it that we're really feeling, because this is so important. Most of us, and again I include myself in there 100%, um, tend to want to shy away from feeling emotions or emotional states that somehow disagree with how we think we should be feeling. And I think that the breath is a great way to begin to open up to that and to enable us to actually open up to those feelings that we're trying to avoid.
And if you experiment with that, and we encourage you experiment, it's not a rule, but experiment, then you would notice that if emotions arise, then we probably constrict. And that's where we begin to hold the breath back. And let's say if I'm getting upset, then I shouldn't get upset. And there's a, there's that tension comes that the breath becomes very shallow or we hold it back, which again is a feedback loop to your brain that, oh, it's danger. There is a certain constriction and it's even harder to hold it back. Or there is a certain shut off that we sort of drop all the energy and then we can't really act. So there could be hyperactivation shut off. But to be able to notice that is a skill. Some people call it interoception. There's basically being able to tune in and it's like, oh, I feel I'm angry right now. Just saying that to yourself can have, okay, let me take a step back to my closet and just try to breathe through that just a minute can give you quite a big of a breathing room with whatever that emotion that is passing. But interoception, that ability to notice what is happening inside, is the first step that is really important.
Yes, absolutely. And so before I touch on interoception a little bit, I want to highlight something you just mentioned about how actors use breathing to get into their role and expressing particular emotions, because that's really important. And and I want to emphasize that these are real scientific studies that actually show that for each emotional state, there is a breath pattern that is associated with it. So it is not just that if we are feeling angry, we breathe in a certain way, but that if we breathe in a certain way, it can help us get angry. That when we feel joy and happiness, that we breathe in a particular way, but that if we breathe in a particular way, we can feel joy and happiness. And this is something that is really, really important. I mean, there is so much more to the breath than just oxygen exchange. The breath is intimately related to our emotional state. Our breath is intimately related to our cognitive state. So it is really, really important. Now, I also you touched on interoception, and that is something that is important to talk about. So, exteroception would be describes that which happens, let's say, from our skin to what we would consider the outside world. So that which we feel that is quote unquote outside of us. And then interoception is what we notice, that feeling of paying attention from the skin inward. And it is such a valuable thing to have and to develop and to practice is our ability to connect with how is it that we're feeling inside. You know, I think so many times when I was taking care of my dad, if you would have asked me, how is it that you're feeling? I think I would have found difficulty in explaining exactly how was it that I was feeling. I could tell you that I wasn't feeling good. I could tell you that maybe I was feeling some anxiety, but in terms of being able to really share what was going on inside of me, I don't think I could have done it. And but as I continue to develop, and I mean, even to this day, is one of the things that I try to have at the forefront of my awareness is always bringing it into how is it that I am reacting? How is it that I am feeling? How is it that being exposed to this situation is making me feel? It is so, I mean, I can emphasize enough how important it is to make that inner connection to our own feelings and emotions.
And I think, especially when we speak about caregivers, for a lot of you, there's things that you cannot change. Like, it's not that you can just say, hey, I'm just going to go out on a walk or whatever. So, and why we say that feeling your feelings are important, because right now, even neuroscience begin to show how if we're suppressing them, it takes so much of our energy, mental effort that adds to that stress. And again, it constricts the breath. So the whole physiology just going to a certain, if it's super activated, then your stress, like that type of, I gotta do something, I gotta do something, is constantly there. Or you can go into burnout when everything shuts off. It's basically like a car that ran out of engine. And no matter how much you try to start it, there's no engine. But being able to use breathing techniques is something that can either calm down the engine that runs way too fast or add fuel to the one that may be shut off for a while.
Yes. You know, if we free our breath, we free our mind. If we free our mind, we free up our body. Because mind and body are like the finger and the nail, they are inseparable. And yes, you know, there are definitely breathing techniques that are more calming, like some of the ones we're going to speak about today. And there are definitely breathing techniques that are a little bit more energizing because, you know, different people react to stress in different ways. Like, you know, if we think about the fight or flight response, how we used to think about, being stressed out years ago, now the definition has expanded. Now it's fight or flight or freeze or fawn. So the idea is that yes, some people can be ready to fight, some are ready to fly, but some people freeze. Some people find themselves paralyzed by stress. And some people may feel like fawn, which is where we try to be the people pleaser, where we try to make everything tidy and perfect for everybody else because we feel that that is somehow going to bring to us the degree of calm that we feel we are missing.
Yeah, absolutely. And still, the free breathing, in terms of that, you can breathe through all of this, is essential because we all know what energy is. And I know sometimes that word is overused, but you know, when you have energy, you can make decisions. If your loved one says something that all of a sudden you feel that emotion coming, you can have that breathing room to make a choice that I'm not going to overreact. For
Absolutely.
that, your stress levels need to come down. There is like this middle ground where you're not hyperactivated and you're not shutting down. So being connected with your breath is a great practice to have. And maybe that's a good point to introduce what are the techniques that you would recommend. And Miguel, you also use that at your work because even though being dementia caregiver at work is not the same as family members, and to any of you who listen, we get it. Family always takes everything to a whole different level for all of us. But still, you have to make high stakes decisions for your patients all the time. And you use the breath. What type of breath do you use? When? How?
Okay. So, yes, most definitely. I've definitely learned how important the breath is to enable me to be as productive and as present as I can be with my patients and all the difficult situations that they, bring into my life every day. So I would say that the first thing is breath awareness, making that shift. Like think about it. When was the last time that you took a conscious deep breath? When was the last time that you just took a deep breath and filled your lungs to maximum capacity? So, this idea of shifting our attention from whatever it is that we are thinking about, which is usually outside of us, our attention is usually focused on exteroception, and bringing that into interoception and bringing that into the awareness of what is it that our breath is doing. So that would be number one.
And
Number
can
two.
I interject here?
Yes, yes.
For example, I use that even during this podcast. Anytime when I notice that my mind goes, oh, what's the next question? Where shall we go next? I return back to paying attention to Miguel, but also I literally just feel my stomach expand, relax, and I tune in into my breath while listening to him so that I can get back to the present moment. And of course, I don't mean to compare this podcast for caregiving. I get it. Your job is way more taxing than I'm enjoying recording this podcast. But nonetheless, it's something that I can do even in this moment.
Well, and G, it's important to realize that in terms of our physical body, it reacts the same to whatever the source of stress may be. So we are stressed out because we had a fight with our best friend, or something happened, we got into a car accident, fender bender, something like that. Our body reacts the same way. So I think that that is important. And this is why the breath and some of these techniques can be so beneficial, regardless of the type of stress that we are experiencing in the moment. One of the things that I do, and I do it a lot when I'm driving. I am a mobile doctor, so I, go to different facilities and I see people at home, etc. So in between patients, when I get in my car, I definitely engage my breath. Um, one of the ones that I really love to do is just taking deep breaths and just consciously uh, taking a belly breath, a diaphragmatic breath using my diaphragm, and there's different permutations of that. Like if you look online about different breathing techniques to help with stress, you may find just the standard, just filling the lungs to maximum capacity, and then exhaling, slowly. You can also find a two-step breath where you just take an inhale and then top it off. So it's like a two-step that you take, to get your lungs to maximum capacity. And the one that I personally like is it's a three-step. So I take 3 steps to filling my lungs to maximum capacity. And then the next step is lengthening the exhale.
And I think the practice that you're using, that's under Huberman, he's recommending to exhale through the mouth with pursed lips.
Yes, absolutely. This is there are different ways of managing the exhale, but this idea of exhaling slowly through thinly pursed lips adds what is called positive and expiratory pressure. So this kind of helps to increase oxygenation, and it definitely helps with uh, stimulating or increasing parasympathetic tone or the rest and digest response. So the idea, just remember that the idea, whether you exhale through the nose or you exhale through the mouth, is to lengthen the exhale. So, in ideal circumstances, the exhale will be approximately twice as long as the inhale. And, there's, I love doing the yoga nidras from Dr. Huberman. And there he talks about taking deep inhales with exhaling through pursed lips. And, I've been doing it once a day for a few weeks now, and I can tell you that it works. However, what the data also shows is that,
Can we stress over here that there is a difference between using your breath on a regular basis, which is like a functional breathing, and using a technique to calm your nervous system down. Like, for example, what we're speaking about to activating parasympathetic nervous system, right? The rest and digest is when you feel, let's say, anxiety or this a little bit of this like anxiousness or maybe anger that you want to bring your nervous system down. That's where it's good to take the three-part inhale and then extended exhale through pursed lips. Or some people recommend even doing this, adding the sound to your exhale as a technique to bring your nervous system down. But then the regular breath, as I think Miguel is about to point out, is breathing through the nostrils.
yes, and I think that if we are in a situation in which we feel acutely taxed or stressed out, I think that this is where particularly exhaling through the mouth may be beneficial. And then as you begin to calm down, then you can either continue with exhaling through pursed lips, or you can begin to incorporate a slower breath through the nose. But I think that, yes, the data would be supportive that in a more acute state, to take a deep inhale, whether you split it into steps or not, and then to exhale slowly through pursed lips seems to be uh, a more efficient way of calming down our nervous system.
Yeah, and you were pointing out that breathing through the nose is important, even on a regular basis. Can you give us the data of what do we have in our nose?
Sure.
Why
Yes.
breathing through the nostrils, through
Sure.
the nose is important?
Yes. So, really, this just speaks to the elegance and just wonder for how amazing our physical body is. And that is that we have this mechanic or mechanoreceptors that are in our nose, that they are sensitive to the quality of our breath. So, what I mean by that is that we have receptors in the nose that enable our brain to know how we're breathing. So, remember that I said that, the emotions can be, I'm sorry, that you can use the breath to beget an emotion. So, this is why, because our brain knows how we're breathing. It's not just like this is an empty tube just going into the lungs, but that there are nerve endings, there are receptors in our nerves that let our brain know How is it that we're breathing? How slowly, how deeply, how smooth our breath is. Our breath is in a more flowing, calm manner. And this is really important because these mechanoreceptors join our olfactory bulb, and from there they go all the way down to the olfactory cortex. And this olfactory cortex is right next to the amygdala and the hippocampus. So, the areas of the brain that are responsible for emotional regulation, or one of the areas that are responsible for emotional regulation and for cognition. So, for a daily dose of how we breathe, moment in and moment out, the idea to breathe in through our nose and exhale through our nose is important. The data is there that people who are mouth breathers tend to have a higher incidence of cardiovascular disease, anxiety, and other kinds of problems.
Yeah, there is a fabulous book, Breath, by James
Mm,
Nestor. He also has
yes.
a masterclass on, oh, actually, no, I think it's a BBC service. I don't remember what it's called, but something. It's like a masterclass by BBC. So if you want to dive more into all of this, there are a lot of resources. Again, Andrew Huberman is talking about it. There's a lot of scientific terms. So if you like to nerd out, we can point you to those resources. But let's recap. So, just awareness of the breath is a tool that can bring you back to peacefulness. So, to be aware of the breath, you can do it anywhere. And one of the ways to do, for example, you can notice your stomach expanding and then going back down. Just that feeling. You can even put your hand on your stomach and feel the hand expanding. Or, as some techniques say, bring awareness to your nostrils and just feel the air passing through the nostrils and how it feels on the way in and on the way out. You can even notice how the air is a little bit colder on the way in and a little bit warmer on the way out. So, just that, if you're somewhere, just do that. Or you can lay down or sit down and spend 5 minutes doing that. If you feel hyperactivation, some techniques like, for example, deep inhale and exhale extended through pursed lips, or three-part inhale, exhale through pursed lips, can be very effective to calm down your nervous system. And then after that, transitioning to regular breath. With all of that, it's really good to establish a practice. Our practice could be just 5 minutes. Because one thing we for sure know, if something is stressful, the last thing we remember is to do that thing that helps. It's like we just sort of fly off. So it's good to establish the practice and begin to get to know your breath. What is happening? What are your reactions? How do you even do those breaths? It could be just 10 minutes in the morning or evening or somewhere in the day, but dedicate a little bit of a practice establishing your own connection with your breath.
Yeah. And it's important that this is not just like we have a headache and we take 2 aspirins. Like, we are stressed out and then we breathe. But that actually a regular practice of breathing changes the structure and function of the brain. Like, we can actually change the way that we look at life. We can actually change the ways in which we are used to reacting to particular situations just by beginning a breathing practice. So, yeah, if we never practice and then we find ourselves in a stressful situation and we try to breathe through it, it may not be that effective and we may say, it doesn't work. So what I would say is definitely begin to make it part of your life. Begin to develop this awareness for interoception, for how is it that you're feeling and how is it that the breath feels as it goes in through your nose as it goes to the back of your throat? How is it that you feel when you expand your lungs? And how is it that you feel as you begin to consciously lengthen your exhale, whether you're exhaling through the mouth or you're exhaling through the nose? Daily practice is most important. And like Ganga said, just start with 5 minutes. Just take a breather, sit somewhere, go out to your lanai or just in the dining room chair, something. Just get yourself comfortable for a few minutes and just pay attention to what your breath is doing.
We hope that with this podcast, we just at least perked your interest into this direction. It is a very deep topic. There is so much we can talk about. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments. We can address them. That's what we do in our lives. We experiment with this, we practice, learn about this. But essentially, we know that stress is the real thing, especially when you're caring for someone with such a difficult disease as dementia. And breath is your best friend. Literally, there is this unseen power that is breathing through us. The more we connect with this, the more you would feel an internal support when you can change the external circumstances. And if anything works for you, can let us know. We would love to hear back from you. If you've used something that we haven't mentioned, but you know it helps, please share. We really appreciate your involvement.
Absolutely. And I only want to add this. Take care of yourself so that you can be a better caregiver. So that you can find yourself in a situation where you can give the very best of what you. So on that note, again, thank you so very much for joining us. We really hope this was useful, and let us know your thoughts in the comments below.
And
Bye-bye.
we'll see you in the next episode.